You're not underpaid because you're bad at your job. Being underpaid is a choice. It comes down to something you've accepted, and you need to understand why you've accepted it. Now, this isn't a blame game. There are obviously nuances to every situation. But if you're making less money than someone else for doing the exact same thing, it's because ultimately you've accepted it. In this video, we're going to understand why, and then we're going to walk through how AI can actually help you get paid what you deserve. So let's get into this. Now, the best place to start with something like this is to look at some kind of framework. And when it comes down to not wanting to leave your permanent job, it usually comes down to three little things. The skills belief gap. You believe that either your skills aren't worth more or that you don't have the skills to actually charge more and things like that. The second one is risk tolerance. So you might not have a taste for risk. Maybe you don't want to go out there and do these things. Or maybe you just believe that you're actually risking far more than you really are. The third thing is a stability preference. You like the fact that every day you get to go to work, you get a paycheck at the end of the month, you know exactly what you're going to do. You have certainty, and that's all well and good. But if you're watching this video, I imagine that you actually want to make more money or have more freedom or stop being overlooked at work and all of those other things, in which case we need to address these 3 points. So the first thing I like to do when I'm trying to break down the bullshit that goes on in my head is find out why as deep as possible. Ask as many layers of why as you possibly can, and it usually starts with one question. Now, in this specific case where we're trying to make more money doing the exact same thing that we're doing, I'm going to ask this question. What's the worst thing you believe will happen if you try earn more money on your own? And usually people will say things like, no one will hire me. That shows you that there is a skills belief gap. I'll go broke, I'll lose everything, I'll end up on the street. That's a risk tolerance gap. It's safer to stay where I am, and that shows you have a preference for stability. But we can go even deeper because this is just surface level stuff that your brain tries to tell you so that you stop digging into deeper layers and actually solve the problem. But that's what we want to do, right? We're here to solve problems. So if we look at the statement of no one will hire me, usually there's multiple layers below that. Things like, I don't know how to speak to people. I don't know how to market myself. I have no idea how to do sales calls. And that cascades into the second fear, which is risk, where I'll go broke, I'll lose everything, I'll end up on the street, my dog will leave me, whatever it is. Ultimately, these thoughts, when we ask why enough times, you reveal these underlying layers of distortions and sometimes a lot of truth that we need to address. Cool, so now that we've looked at a few things at a high level, what we need to do is kind of dive down into these even deeper. And we do that by looking at the evidence that is for the thought and against the thought. This is something called the court case. It's very popular in cognitive behavioral therapy, but you can really use this anywhere in your life to kind of identify what is the bullshit thought and what is the reality, because we need to understand these two things. Behind every thought, there is some level of truth, but there's also a bunch of lies. Once we separate those, we can focus on working on the things that actually need our attention. So if we go on the fact of I have no skills, let's look for some evidence against the thought. I have the skills I'm already using every single day for the job that I'm doing. So we know that from a technical perspective, we're good on skills. But now, is there any evidence to support the thought of I don't have any skills? Sure, I have no idea how to sell myself like a consultant. I have no idea how to price myself. So now you know from looking at this very simple thing, you don't need to work on your technical stuff at all, but you need to work on other things like how to sell yourself like a consultant or how to price yourself, things like that. Maybe you would have other ones. I don't know how to do sales calls. Okay, cool. You really don't know how to do that. So then you write these things down, and these are the things that you're going to focus on because this is the reality behind the distortion. You're good from a technical perspective. There are other things that are stopping you from moving forward because you have these fears around them that ultimately lead to you thinking you're going to end up on the street. So, is my skills gap true? In this case, we did find a little bit of a skills gap, not related to the technical stuff, but to a few other things you would need in order to sell yourself at a higher price and not have a permanent employer. So then you ask yourself, can I not learn these things? Can I not practice these things every single day? Do I need money to do these things? Do I need something I can't obtain to get the thing that I want? And one of the best reframes to actually add to all of this is to say that you don't know these things yet. Because the truth behind all of these points here is that you can actually go and learn these things. Right now, you might not know how to price yourself as a consultant, but one YouTube video can answer that question for you, especially on my channel. But you also have other questions attached to this. And if you can't find a video on YouTube, you have AI, you have Google. Someone somewhere has already done the thing that you want to do, so you can easily find out this information. Information isn't something that gets locked behind a gate anymore. That's just not how it works. So even if you had a technical skills gap, let's say you didn't have any of the other problems and it was a technical skills gap, you can go and learn anything technical for free. and you can learn it twice as fast because of AI. And you can do that while you're permanently employed. So you can see any of these things from a skills perspective. Once you find the evidence behind your thought, you can go and work on them while you're permanently employed. And that's important because the more power you have now, the less fear you're going to have later. Now, let's say that you're moving on to the next part where you're trying to evaluate from a risk perspective. We're going to draw that exact same table like we did before. So we have things against the thought. I have some savings. I have some friends. So worst case scenario, I'm not going to end up on the street doing stuff under a bridge I'm not proud of, because you have savings for a few months and worst case scenario, you can sleep on a friend's couch. But then we need some evidence for the thought. There isn't much demand for what I'm doing right now. I don't know how to get recurring clients. So those are very valid from a risk perspective. You can see that you should address these things before you move. So if you have done market research and you identify there isn't much demand for what I'm doing right now, then you know you need to go back to step one, which is the skills gap, and you need to bridge that gap of your skills. So what is in demand now? What can I do to get me where I want to go, ultimately to decrease or remove this risk of there not being much demand for the skill that I'm currently in? Then the second point of I don't know how to get recurring clients. That's just a simple thing. You figure out how to do sales call, how to do lead gen, things like that. They all sound scary, but realistically, it's just a simple process of doing the same thing over and over again and understanding how to talk to people. Point being is that, again, we have now found out what was not true from a risk perspective and what is true from a risk perspective. And these are the things, again, that we will focus on breaking down so that we remove this scary thought from our heads. So when I'm addressing my risk, there's a bunch of questions that I'm going to ask myself on top of this court case assessment that we just did. And they go a little something like this. If I got a job the first time, why wouldn't I get it the second time if I fail at something else? And this is a huge reframe that a lot of people have when it comes to risk, because they think, okay, well, what if I go freelancing, consulting, whatever, and it doesn't work for me and I'm going to end up on the street? But no, you're not, because you got a job the first time, far less skilled than probably where you are right now. So worst case scenario, you're just going to go and get another job that will probably pay you more money than the one that you're in right now anyway. So look at it from that perspective. But then there are other things that will decrease your risk, like do I have savings? Do I have or need a network to do the thing? Because those are two very different situations. And I'm pretty sure if you're already in a job, you know a few people and they know a few people and so on. So there is always a warm network to help you get you where you want to go. Are my skills in demand? Again, if it's in demand, you're far less likely to have higher risk because people who are in demand, they sell a lot quicker. So the point being is that you want to stack the evidence of all these things to help get you wherever it is that you want to go as fast as possible. And the question that I like to ask myself when I get to the end of all of these assessments is, what are you actually risking by not taking any risks? And if I look back on my life, every time I've taken a risk, which is pretty much through everything, it always paid off, even when it was really hard, even when it was super emotional, I ended up in some kind of trauma or whatever. The scary, risky thing always paid off over the thing that I didn't do. So on risk, you really need to keep that in mind, that ultimately everything gets risky, and the more you risk, the more payoff you're going to get from it. Then we get on to stability. Now, a lot of people believe that because they're getting this permanent paycheck, that they have this warm, fuzzy feeling that everything is going to be fine forever. So we need to try and stack the evidence against the thought and for the thought. So against the thought, people get fired every single day. People can get sick. People can die. Company can go out of business. You could list a ton of things against this thought. For the thought, it's easier as long as I stay valuable to the employer and the company stays afloat. And that is entirely true. So if it turns out that you're looking at this and realistically your biggest problem is just making more money, you don't care about any of the other stuff, you look at it from this perspective and you think, okay, cool. Is my employer likely to stay in business a long time? If you're working for Microsoft, sure, maybe. Companies that big and that important, as long as they can stay ahead, especially now AI is out, they can be super valuable probably your entire life. So the trick then becomes is how do you stay or become more valuable to them to get more money? And that's a whole separate thing that you need to kind of dive into. But the point being is that, again, we have identified two things or areas of work. But for the sake of this video, I'm going to pretend that everybody not just wants more money, but also wants the freedom and all the other amazing stuff that comes along with consulting and freelancing and those types of things. So we're going to go into the next part of this, where is stability actually real? Do people not get sick? Do people not get fired? Do skills not go out of favor? Is it really stability if you're living paycheck to paycheck? Because a lot of people do. They get paid every month, which is awesome, great. You have predictability. But predictability isn't stability if you're living on a breadline. So you need to keep that in mind as well. If you're getting paid a certain amount of money and it's not enough to cover your basic expenses or go on holiday and live a life, your stability isn't really living, it's just staying alive. In which case, how valuable is stability to you at this point? So you have to ask yourself, is the stability that you have now worth sacrificing everything else for, which is anything new at this point? So the whole point of these three things that we've been speaking about is to find out where the truth is and where the lies are that your brain tells you to keep you safe. Because again, it's not doing all of this because there's something wrong with you. Like, we're wired to go towards safety and stay away from the uncomfortable things. But those are the things that stop you from making more money or starting your own business or going out there and doing the things that you really want to do. A life of freedom. So to give you a practical example of this, if we look at what each thought is actually costing you. From a skills belief perspective, somewhere out there in the magical wilderness, there's a DevOps engineer with your skills charging $1,000 a day. That's $20K a month you're not touching because you don't want to position yourself differently than where you are now. From a risk perspective, the risk of trying one deal and it falling through over losing $20K every month for the next 40 years of your career, that's a shitload of money that you're actually losing because of a fear of risk or a fear of failure or something like that. At this point, a fear of not even trying. And then the stability preference. So a stable job can vanish overnight. Like I said, anything can happen. Restructures, layoff, new boss, someone else gets liked more than you do and you get demoted, that type of stuff. One paycheck means that you actually have one point of failure. And these are super important points because when I get into the path and what I'm currently doing to diversify all of this stuff, I'll show you how it can actually be the exact opposite of what you currently believe, permanently employed versus being a consultant or a freelancer. So stick around because we're going to get into that really soon. But first, I want to give you guys a prompt that will actually speed through this entire process that I just covered in this video. Now, I'm not going to go through this whole prompt because it's super long, but essentially what this prompt is going to do, you can copy and paste this, it will be in the description below, is it's going to help you understand if you have a skills gap, a risk tolerance problem, or a stability preference. And then it will help you address each one of those layers by asking you simple questions and prompts that you can keep having a live conversation with. And this is super valuable because obviously it's a streamlined version of everything that we just discussed, but you can input all of your own details into here. It can help you address any skills gap that you have or any risk frameworks that you need to implement in your life to understand how to break things down into smaller pieces. I do have another video on all of this that you can check out as well, but this prompt will get you the majority of the way there. So copy and paste this from the description below and get started to find out where your gaps lie, where the truth is, where the lies are, and what you can actually do to get you ahead. Okay, so here we are at my magical Figma board where you can see we're talking about all the things that you need to change. So the heading brings us to consulting. Surprise, this is the path forward. Now, depending on what region you're in, you might think that this is freelancing or contracting or consulting, but they're all kind of interchangeable, although I would say freelancing is more taking on specific tasks as opposed to the types of things that a consultant does. But the point being is that you are going to learn to sell your skills for far more than what you're currently selling them for, which is working permanently. So when it comes down to consulting, a lot of people think that it's just some dude who went to an Ivy League school and his LinkedIn picture looks like he should be in a fucking toothpaste commercial. But that's not what consulting is at all. At a high level, it's literally just taking some form of large problem, breaking it down into smaller chunks over a length of time and charging a ton of money for it so that this person gets this amazing, expensive outcome. Usually it's going to save a business a bunch of money or make them a ton of money, that sort of thing. It's a high value problem that you solve. And that brings us swiftly into problem number one, which is the skills thing that we mentioned in the first half of this video. You're already solving these high value problems. The only difference is that the framing behind the way that you're solving it isn't worth a lot of money. Right now, you're just an employee. You go there 9 to 5 every day. You probably do a whole bunch of overtime and a whole bunch of shit that's not even part of your job responsibility just because you've accepted this framing and haven't accepted all of the risk and the other things that we spoke about already. And that really is the harsh truth because the only difference between you and a consultant is the marketing. It is that someone has said, okay, I'm willing to take on this risk. I don't really need that much stability because it's all an illusion anyway. So I'm going to market myself as a person who solves this massive problem with the skills I have. So we need to do that exact thing, because realistically, if we look at the cost, someone else is making $1,000 a day doing the exact same thing as you, if not more. Again, depending on your region, obviously, if you live in the bayou somewhere and they don't have a lot of computers, your day rate's probably not going to be that high. Or maybe it will be because people won't actually have the skills out there. Could go either way. Point being is that you obviously need to understand the market and things like that when you're getting into this. But for the most part, it all comes down to just marketing yourself differently. So the first thing that we're going to do is reframe your skills. You need to audit every single task that you do, everything that you've done for a business that can be seen as valuable. If you're working in DevOps, that's like pipelines, Kubernetes, managing entire environments in AWS, things like that. You want to put all of those things down and you want to try and find where the expensive things are within that. So did you save time? Did you improve efficiency? Did you make things easier for a large part of the staff? Stuff like that. And then you're going to package it into some form of outcome. So instead of saying I work in DevOps, now I help this type of niche solve this expensive problem by doing this specific thing. And you can see that that framework, it's really simple. And I'm sure you've seen a lot of people on LinkedIn actually have that stuff on their profile because it changes their positioning entirely. The whole point of doing this being that you need to market yourself as the best looking product out there. So to do this as fast as possible, I've given you guys a prompt because nobody really wants to just sit there and go through everything themselves anymore. You're a consulting positioning expert. Your task is to take my existing skills and turn them into premium outcome-based positioning for high-paying consulting work. Now, you can put in all the variables here. I'm not going to go through this whole prompt, but essentially you chuck in your skills. Maybe you talk about where you've worked, some of the stuff that you've done in the past. You throw it in here, maybe even your resume, and this thing will rebuild everything from the perspective of a high-value consultant, and that's exactly where you want to be. So once we've done step one, we've now remarketed ourselves. Our LinkedIn profile looks awesome. Our resume looks awesome, and we know exactly what it is that we're selling to these people because we're no longer just a DevOps engineer. We come into tier 2, which is the risk tolerance problem. And the issue that I see with this is that everybody thinks that in order to take risk, you literally just have to jump off of a cliff. That's what I did when I went into this because I had no degree, I had no experience. But realistically, I thought to myself, I have nothing to lose by doing any of this shit, so I'm just going to do what I've always done and take massive risks. The point being is that you can do that, and that's extremely stressful, and you will learn and grow very fast, or you will fail. Thankfully, I did the learning and growing thing. But the point being is that you don't actually have to start off that way. Once I did a few years of consulting, I realized that there are separate ways that you can branch out into things without actually having to do this. So let's take a look at that in this framework here. So the problem here again is that you don't want this uncertainty. You have this fear that if I go and do this thing, I'm going to go broke and I'm going to lose everything. So we use something like this in order to get over that. The first thing being is that we start with low risk because again, we don't want to take on this big massive chunk. We want to start small because we're not really sure how we handle risk. So you could do things like side consulting gigs or freelancing, which again is a different thing, but basically you could create a profile on Upwork. You can see how you handle clients from that perspective, whether they like your profile. It's a good way to test the kind of product that you've built around yourself, which is essentially just your skills that you're solving the problem for. And it's a really good way to get started because you're still working full time, you're still getting your paycheck and all of that stuff, but this is just now additional income. Obviously, you need to check your employment contract. You need to make sure there's no conflict of interest and things like that. Worst case scenario, you can ask your employer. But from a legal perspective, in most countries, it is legal to take on some form of moonlighting. It just comes down to the employer. You'd need to check that for yourself. But this is a pretty lucrative way to get started. Another thing that you could do, instead of thinking that you need to go out there and do this big thing where you're jumping off a cliff and becoming a contract consultant, is that you can actually just go and work permanently for a consultancy. A lot of people think of consultancies as the big four like PwC or McKinsey and places like that, but that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about boutique consultancies. These are places that usually have between 2 and maybe like all the way up to 150, but they're way smaller is the point that I'm trying to make. There are several reasons why it's awesome to work for them. One being that you get noticed a lot easier, but 2, they're far more willing to train people who are juniors and help them get up in this ladder. So you would join one of them. This is exactly what I did. And I didn't know anything at the time. So I joined this consultancy. They brought me on as a complete junior. I learned how to speak to clients, how to network with people, how to do the actual technical work that I was doing, which at the time was cybersecurity. I had no idea how to do any of that, but they were willing to invest in me. And they paid me a much lower salary, obviously. But the point being, after 2.5 years, I was extremely valuable from a skills perspective, and I already had my network built. I had a list of recruiters who had reached out to me over those 2.5 years because now my skills were developed. So it was a really good way to get into this thing. And from there, I went out into contract consulting. So again, you can see how this is a really good way to dip your toes in, because coming in it from this perspective of being a permanent consultant, I was then able to build boutique partner relationships with other consultancies to then go and be their contract consultant later on. So again, I didn't stay perm and get underpaid. I left that once I got what I needed, once I did my time with them and paid them back all the investment that they gave to me. And then I went out there on my own and I started my own business. And yes, it was still scary and there was still all of these things attached to it, but I wasn't alone. I had now built my network. I had an understanding of how to deal with people. I had an understanding of how to work with recruiters. So the risk was massively chunked down from this big scary thing into a much more manageable thing. And then thirdly, to manage your risk, you want to have a financial safety plan. Now, again, when I went contract consulting, I didn't have that. I had no savings and I just had my bachelor party in South Africa. So there were tons of things working against me and it made the experience far more stressful. But I would say if you're going to do this, at a minimum, you want 3 months savings. Usually I like to keep 6 because there could be times where the market is a lot drier and you need a ton of savings. But the point being is that all of this risk can be chunked. So again, I've given you a prompt on how to do that. So you're my consulting business strategist. I have valuable technical skills, but I'm afraid of quitting my job because I fear inconsistent income, blah, blah, blah. So then we give it a task and you need to give it everything that you have from the previous prompt. So after you've built this amazing person that you are, this thing will go and it will tell you how to diversify all of this risk and how to make everything seem less scary for you. And again, you can obviously ask follow-up prompts and questions to this thing to gain understanding and a new mindset, because the whole point isn't just to copy and paste someone else's templates and look at someone else's path and think, oh, I need to do that exact thing. Your situation could be different. There are tons of nuances to all of this. This is just a framework to help you move forward. So once you've done that, we then get to point 3, tier 3, as I've called it, stability, preference. Now, for the most part, these two are kind of linked. You know, you don't want to take the risks because you kind of like the stability. But there are two different things that need to be tackled. So the problem is that you are clinging to this safe job, when the real fear is that, you know, change and losing structure, it's super scary for your brain and for a whole bunch of other reasons. But realistically, your stable job can disappear overnight, as we've been through already. So the best solution is to diversify your income as fast as possible. And the second is to build your warm network. And the third is to create a predictable pipeline. And this is currently where I'm at now. So after I did contract consulting for a while, I thought to myself, this is fun. But if I don't find any contracts, and let's just say it went over the 6 month line, and back then I only had 6 months worth of savings, about 5 years ago, I thought to myself, what am I going to do now? So I needed to start to diversify where my income was coming from. And the first place that I did is that I thought, okay, I don't really just want to sell my time anymore. Maybe I can sell other people's time without actually needing to take on any permanent staff. So I thought, how do I do that? There must be other consultants out there who are looking for work too. But they're also unpredictable if you just go find random contractors. So what I did is I found a bunch of partners in my home country of South Africa, and I was in London at the time. And I started a second company, which was literally just like this front end thing to put me in front of the clients that I had already served previously. I went through my warm network. I found a bunch of people I'd worked with before, and I said, hey, I'm now doing this thing. I'm selling DevOps services, and I've got this team behind me. They're remote. They're in South Africa, blah, blah, blah. And I just resold a trusted partner's contractors to the end client, and I made a margin on that. So I now had my own consulting time that I was selling. I was selling other consultants' time through trusted partners. And then I had a productized solution that I was going on, part of my community at the time. So I had 3 different forms of income coming in. You can see how it debunks this brain's myth where you think you need permanent employment in order to have this stability or safety, when arguably I was in control of all 3 of these things more than I would have been in control of my position as a permanent employee. So I went from this underpaid employee and over a 12-year timeline became this person with diversified income streams, for the most part, which I control, where the return on whatever it is that I'm putting in was far more than anything I would have ever made working permanently. And the truth is, once you get the ball going, once you get out there and you've gotten your network going and you've got some recruiter relationships and all that stuff, they all feed on one another. A lot of people talk about cold DMs and like going out there and reaching out to strangers. In 12 years, I have not had to do that simply because my network is self-fulfilling. My pipeline is always warm. I'm always trying to help people wherever I can because I know one day I might need help from someone. That's the way that the circle works. People come to you, you help them, you go to them, they help you, back and forth. But I have recruiters who will find me work. I have partner consultancies who will bring me work for the products that they're doing. I have my own ability to go out to my network now and speak directly to people who already know me. They trust me, and I can go and say, hey, I'm on the bench at the moment, I'm looking for XYZ, or hey, I've got some consultants now doing XYZ. Are you looking for anyone? And it becomes this predictable pipeline, which is ultimately where we want to get to with all of this. So I've made a prompt for this as well. You're my business stability strategist. I currently have a full-time job and I'm afraid to give it up my steady paycheck. Your task is to help me build a diversified income map so that I'm not dependent on a single employer for all my income. And for the most part, this thing is going to tie in with the risk one again, because they're so linked to one another. But it's important because it will help you understand for your niche specifically how you can diversify your income streams. They'll probably still be related to around the three things that I mentioned of the warm network, the recruit network, and the partner consultancies, because from my perspective, those are the best strategies to have this self-fulfilling pipeline that just keeps giving back to you. But of course, all of this was just at a high level because I wanted to show a specific path. I have a ton of videos on this on my channel, specifically breaking down each of these problems and giving you step-by-step guides on how you can actually get your first client, how you can actually find people within your warm network, and how you can actually make more money doing the exact same thing that you're doing now. So if you have any more questions, please leave them in the comments below. Otherwise, check some of the videos on the screen now. If you want some personal guidance, you can also check out my community where we're doing stuff like this every single day. Otherwise, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.